If you ever thought that watercolor landscapes were too difficult, then this painting is 100% for you. In fact, I wish I could get everyone to try this one. It's super simple, relaxing, beginner friendly, and thanks to a slightly injured thumb, you may even catch me painting parts of it with my left hand. Now, I have my supplies already set to go. I have my watercolor paints, some clean water, a paper towel, and of course some watercolor paper. Now, I do have a very simple outline drawing on my paper ready to go. I think you could easily draw this for yourself. Let me pull out this darker version really quickly so you can see it a little bit better. But if you would rather just jump over to the fun of painting, then I will have this outline available in my Etsy shop as well that you can simply print out and trace onto your watercolor paper using a light table or even just a well-lit window in your house, and you'll be all set to go. Then of course we need some brushes. I have two brushes I'll be using for this piece, a larger number 10 round and a small number 3 round. These brushes are actually from my Craftamo set. There are still a few left in stock, so I will leave a link for these as well as my Etsy shop link and links and information for any of the other products you see me using today in the description of this video if you're interested. I'll just quickly tape my paper down to help prevent some of the warping, and then we can get started. And you may be wondering about my thumb. It's just a little sprain, nothing serious, mostly just annoying. I'm sure it will be fine in a few days, but it is feeling a little bit sore today, so I may have to do a little bit of left-hand painting. We are going to see how this goes. Okay, one other supply that we are going to need for this painting today is some masking fluid. And actually, if you don't have masking fluid, you could probably use just some white opaque paint at the end instead. But since I have the fluid, I'm going to go ahead and do that just to make things a little bit easier. And then along with my masking fluid, I also have an old paintbrush here to use with it, so I don't risk ruining one of my nicer brushes. But I do recommend putting a little bit of liquid soap in the bristles before using that fluid. That kind of tends to help clean things up a little bit better in the end and keep the bristles from gumming up. Now, I do also have two colors of paint that are not normally in my palette that I will be using today. I have here Cerulean blue as well as some yellow ochre. These are both terrific landscape colors, but if you watch my channel very often, you know I focus mostly on florals. Occasionally, I do enjoy trying to do a landscape here and there, even though that is not my forte. I'll go ahead and just take a bit of each of those colors and put a dab onto my palette here that we can mix and use. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. The very first step we are going to want to do is paint on the masking fluid. This is a little bit embarrassing, but I seem to be having a struggle opening this bottle with my left hand, so I may have to run off just for a second and go get my teenage son to help me with this, but I will be right back. Okay, here we are. I've got my bottle open now with just a little bit of help. So I'm going to go ahead and take some fluid and start painting in little blobs or circles on my page here that are going to represent little flowers in the end. And when I say blobs or circles, that is literally what I mean. I am just dabbing this fluid on here. I'm not really being too careful or trying to make specific flower shapes. I'm really just keeping this loose and simple. In fact, you may not even need to draw this part on your page at all. This could definitely be done more free-handed if you'd rather. You will notice though that I'm going to try to keep some of the larger blobs and circles closer to the foreground or bottom of the page, and then as I make lines of these flowers more in the distance, they're going to get smaller and smaller as we go farther out or higher up on the page. This is just going to help a little bit with that perspective. Now this part can just take a minute to do, but like I say, it's really not hard at all. You can get through this fairly quickly. In fact, I may even skip through this part of the video just a little bit so I don't take too much of your time on this part. Okay, great. Now that did take a minute to do, but I promise it will be worth it in the end. I recommend at this point though, going and rinsing out and washing out that masking fluid brush right now, just to help keep those bristles from gumming up. And then you are going to want to let this masking fluid completely dry before moving on to the next step. But once as it is, you can go ahead and pull out that larger number 10 round brush, maybe get some of our sky paint colors ready to go here. I'm going to be using this Cerulean blue, so I'll just add a little bit of water in the mix to lighten that up and make it more easy to spread. And then I may also pull out a tiny bit of Payne's gray as well. Now, my hand does feel like it needs a bit of a break, and I think I can do this part with my left hand, although I haven't really painted with my left hand before, so this is going to be an adventure. But I'm going to take a little bit of clean water and just paint in the entire sky area with just water first. We'll be painting in the sky using the wet on wet technique just to help keep things light and fluffy looking. Then when we have the entire space wet and watered down, let's go ahead and take some of that cerulean blue and begin dropping some of that color within the sky. Now, I am going to be purposefully keeping this painting a little bit more light in value and muted in color, just because I think it kind of gives it a very peaceful and relaxing look, which is exactly what I'm going for with this piece. So I'm going to keep the darkest blue colors right at the very top of the page, and as I start moving downward, we'll get lighter and lighter towards that horizon line. The biggest thing to help you paint in the sky is that you're going to want to look at the negative space. Instead of painting in the clouds, we're going to be painting around the clouds. So paint the blue color in some nice fluffy circular shapes going around where you may want the cloud formations to be. The great thing is that because we already have the water on the page, this really is going to help this paint blend and spread in a very natural way, making the clouds look very soft. All right, now that I have the cerulean blue in the major spaces of the sky, I'm just going to take a tiny bit of this Payne's gray while everything is still wet and just add a touch here and there to sort of add a shadow look. Now, we really don't want too much of this though, just a hint, and let that blend into that blue paint color just a little bit. Because my painting is still wet, it's doing a lot of that all on its own. If your painting has started to dry though, you probably could just skip this step altogether. I hope you are enjoying this painting so far. I think you're really going to love this one. It's just relaxing and peaceful. In fact, I wish I could just escape to a place just like this. I try to find paintings for any level of painter here on my channel, from beginner to more advanced, so that there is something for everyone. So if you find you are enjoying my painting and teaching style today, I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on any of my new and upcoming weekly tutorials. Okay, very good. I think that's it for the sky. We're going to just go ahead and let that dry before we move on. All right, I've let that sit for a bit. It is still just a tiny bit damp, but I think I can go ahead and move on to the next part here. So I'm going to pull out the smaller number 3 round brush now and just paint in the distant hillside that's right against the horizon line with water first. Then for our paint colors, we'll pull out a touch of olive green onto the tray and mix it with maybe a little bit of yellow ochre that we can use for some bushes in just a minute. But first off, let's take some of this cerulean blue once again in a slightly more concentrated version than the sky and paint that color in our watered down section of that background hillside. Very good. Now, while that is still wet, let's go ahead and take the olive green and yellow ochre mixture, and we're just going to start dabbing in some spots where we feel like some bushes or trees might be out at the base of this hillside. Now, since my blue hill is still a little bit wet, this is going to bleed and blend just a little bit, but that's okay. Like I say, we're keeping everything very soft looking today. Of course, we don't want it to overrun the space of the hill, so just be careful to only keep this at the very base. Then once as we have all of those bushes in place, let's take a darker, more concentrated olive green color and add that in at the very base of the bushes to add a hint of shadow and create a bit more dimension. All right, good enough. I may just take a hint of water on this small brush and just gently rub at the base of these bushes just so that we don't have a really hard line here. Now, we want that to be completely dry before moving on to the next step. But once as it is, let's go ahead and begin painting in the fields or foreground area next. I'll go ahead and get a few colors ready. First up, I'm going to have some raw sienna. Then we'll have some darker burnt umber. And then I'm going to mix up a really dark brown by taking some of the burnt umber and mixing it with some Payne's gray. I'll also go ahead and freshen up the sap green on my tray and then add some water to the yellow ochre here. And actually, I might as well pull out some Gamboge as well. We have a whole range of neutral colors here we can choose from. Now I'll just go ahead and take some water and paint in the entire foreground area of this piece. We'll be painting this in wet on wet as well. Then once as we have this entire section covered with water, we'll go ahead and begin dropping in the colors, moving from the lightest to the darkest. So we'll start with maybe some of the Gamboge first and add that right at the very top of the fields or under the base line of the bushes. Next up, I'll take some of the yellow ochre and begin placing that in here, mixing it and blending it into some of the Gamboge a little. And we don't need this to be perfectly smooth and straight. In fact, adding in some lines of color here and there can kind of add to the texture and dimension of the fields as well. So try to have some areas a little bit lighter, maybe some areas a little bit darker. I think I might even focus some of the darker sections right around the base of those dots of masking fluid that are on here, just to really help with the contrast once as that masking fluid is taken off, as well as help create a shadow look. Okay, moving on to the next color, let's go ahead and pull out some of the raw sienna and begin blending that in with some of the yellow ochre. Again, maybe creating some stripes that are darker in value, especially among where our masking fluid flowers are. All right, we've kind of pulled that color down to the bottom of the page. So let's go ahead and grab some of the burnt umber and start dropping in some of that color in here. And a lot of this is going to be focused mostly at the base of the page. And I'm doing this in even some dots or blobs, kind of creating more texture in here as well. This is really looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and take this one level more and start adding in that really dark brown color, which is the burnt umber mixed with Payne's gray. You can see that this is really starting to create some nice texture and depth into this painting, as well as some shadow spaces. So you may at this point need to just play around with it a little bit more, adding in some darker colors where you feel like it needs it. As long as the page is still wet, you can kind of keep playing around with things. But once as it starts to dry, you may want to call it done, just so you don't get any blooms or hard lines in there. At this point, I'm also going to take some of that olive green and start adding that in here as well to create even more color and contrast to this section. We really want to have some nice dark values at the base of this page. This really kind of helps give the illusion of the foreground being closer to us. Doesn't that look nice? I just love how this is coming together so far. The good news, believe it or not, is that we are actually just about done with this. So let's let this completely dry and then we'll come back into it in just a minute. All right, I think that's just about dry at this point, so while I let that finish drying, let's go ahead and paint in the cute little kite in the sky next. This really adds a fun element and a focal point to this piece. So I'm just going to take the smaller number 3 round brush and paint in the first section with just water first, and then I'll take a touch of the cerulean blue that's already on our tray and paint it in a slightly more concentrated version than the sky, just so it can kind of stand out from that a little bit. Very good. Let's let that section dry before painting the other half. So while we wait, let's take a little bit of Payne's gray and just add in that kite string off to the side here, painting it in a very nice thin line using just the tip of the brush. And if it's hard for you to paint in thin lines, you could also just use a thin marker or something and draw in instead. I don't think that's cheating in my opinion, but whatever works. Now we'll take a touch of the cerulean blue and maybe even some Payne's gray and start painting in the little bows along the kite string. Then when the first half of the kite is dry, we can go ahead and paint in the second half. Again, I'll use water first, and this time we want to paint this half slightly darker than the first half, just so they don't look totally the same. So I may start this one out with a little bit more Payne's gray in the mix before I add in that cerulean blue. I don't know. That seems maybe a little bit too dark in my opinion, but that's okay. I'm just going to take my paper towel and dab off a tiny bit of that color just in the center of that section, just to lighten that up a little bit more. Isn't this so cute? I absolutely love it. So now there's only one more step left to do here, and you'll want to make sure that your entire painting is completely dry before you do this, just so you don't risk smearing or smudging anything. But we're going to take a good eraser, maybe erase some of the pencil lines that we still might be able to see, and then we're going to begin taking off all of the masking fluid on the page. I'm just going to keep using the eraser here because it's easier for me to do it that way, but you are totally welcome to just use your fingers and rub it off or pull it off if that's easier to do. Look how fun. This automatically just created some white flowers out in this field. If you really wanted to, you could add some color into those or maybe add some touches of shadow. I considered doing that, but in the end, I just decided to leave it as it is, just some pretty white flowers out in the distant fields. I'm just keeping this uncomplicated, very simple, very loose and soft. I actually really love this piece. It may be one of my new favorites. I really hope you're going to give this one a try. It is so much fun and it's just super relaxing to paint. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had some fun and maybe even learned something new. If you did enjoy this tutorial, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.